Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between a series, exploring its evolution, design, and legacy. For this season, we are covering the Resident Evil franchise. My name is Max Roberts, and I am joined, as always, by Logan Moore. Hi, Logan.
Welcome to the family, Max.
Oh my gosh, I'm confused now. We're doing Fast and Furious family, and now we've got the Baker family in Resident Evil. We're just in a family mood lately.
Yeah, that's our favorite forms of media or franchises that center around families. This is our new through line for Chapter Select moving forward.
Chapter Select, a family podcast where you can enjoy the subject matter of family.
Yeah, we're gonna do a whole season about your own family. That'll be season 6. It's gonna be about your bounce back and forth between your family members.
This is a family tree.
Yeah, we'll do an episode about you. We'll do one about Abby, one about your mom and your dad, one about your daughter. What's her name?
Top secret. Evelyn. There you go.
Evelyn. It's a very timely name. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fits perfectly with the theme. We are talking about Resident Evil 7 in this episode. We just wrapped
Resident Evil
up.
7 Biohazard.
Or if you're in Japan, Biohazard 7 Resident Evil.
Exactly.
And maybe before we get into it, we're playing this one now in our second episode. You made this happen because this is similar to the first game in some ways, with design and inspiration, and it's the reboot of the series. So I guess if anyone's wondering why we're playing Resident Evil 7 now, that's why,
I mean, the technical, if we did our usual bounce back and forth, Village would have been the next one, but I didn't feel like playing the second Ethan Winters led game made sense before playing this one, and I also really like the dynamic of playing the first one and then jumping into this one, since 7 really tries to mirror a lot of aspects of the original game. It just felt like a good companion to play after the original game, so that is what has brought us to RE7 this time around. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the rundown of all the basic information here about Resident Evil 7. As every other game in the series, it was developed and published by Capcom. It originally came to the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. It was also compatible with PSVR on PS4. And at the time we're recording this, it has just recently come to PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. We both played on PS5, correct?
Yes, we both did the PS5 version of the game.
Okay. It originally released on March 24th, 2017. The game director was Koshi Nakanishi. The producers on the game were Masachika Kawada and Tsuyoshi Kanda. And the composers were Akiyuki Morimoto, Miwako Shinone, and Satoshi Hori. Resident Evil 7 ended up scoring an 86 out of 100 on Metacritic for both of the console versions. I think the PC version might have been a little bit lower, but it was a negligible difference. So it sits in 86 overall. All in all, this is a good game by standards of critics and fans, I think. And there's a lot of thoughts and ideas out there about this game, because this one, as you mentioned before, is a reboot of the series, which I think is one of the key things we'll talk about throughout this episode. There's a lot we can talk about with this game's legacy, which I know we're already planning on doing, because this is a very important and pivotal game within the larger Resident Evil franchise, and we'll get to that stuff. But before we do, let's just talk about our broad histories and experiences with the game. I can start. I guess I played it through the first time the week it came out, and I have not returned to it since, and this is my first time returning to it since it initially came out.
You got the platinum.
I did get the platinum. I played this game on Madhouse this time around. I actually did 2 playthroughs before this episode that we're recording. Yeah, and I did not have to do that. I played one on Madhouse because my original run back in 2017 was just a normal playthrough. Through the power of PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, forward compatibility, I literally still had all of my original saves.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
They did good with being able to bring your old saves over when they updated all those PS4 games.
Yeah, because when I was playing the original version of this game, I was making a lot of saves, a lot of different save files. So I had a lot of different snapshots throughout the game. So for instance, when I beat this game on Madhouse, I did one of the endings, which there are 2 endings in the game, which each depend on who you choose to save when you get to the divergent point there, with either saving Zoe or saving Mia about 2/3 of the way through the game. And I think in my original playthrough, I saved Mia, which I think is the vast majority of people do. Yeah, it's what most people ended up doing. So in my Madhouse playthrough, I saved Zoe, and I got the second ending. And then after that, I went back to a save that I had that was from my original playthrough, where I had originally saved Mia, and it was right at the very last typewriter before the end of the game. And then I just played through the final 5 minutes and pinged the other trophy that way. And then I did one speed run after that, which was about 2 hours and 45 minutes on easy mode.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, yeah.
That's very good.
You, on the other hand, have played some of this game, but not all of this game until now. So
correct. So I got the game when it came out because I had bought PSVR in October, right before it. And this was a game, this was the must-buy game for PSVR that first year. This was a launch window title. It was the definitive game to buy. I had played the demo. I actually wrote a preview for it. I found it in my Google Docs searching for stuff. So I wrote about the midnight demo that came out for this game. They also had the kitchen demo that came with the PSVR demo disc. You remember that? Where you'd sit in the chair.
Yeah, but you didn't know it was Resident Evil.
It was just called Kitchen, yeah. It was like a
just called
PT kind of
Kitchen.
move. Yeah.
Yeah, there was just this very broad horror demo that was available to try on PSVR, and it's like, oh, this is cool. And then only later do you find out, oh my gosh, it's Resident Evil. Yeah. That was part of their 2016 press conference at E3, I believe. That was an awesome reveal.
I want to talk about the reveal part of this game a little bit later as well. So I played that, and I played a little bit of it when it, in VR or whatever, and I don't remember necessarily how far I got, but I took a break from it, or like a few months of a break, I think, because later in October, I came back to it. So, 5-6 months later, what have you, came back to it. We actually spoke about it on episode 113, Shadow of Loot Boxes on Millennial Gaming Speak, and I wanted to play you this clip because I think it's pretty funny. This is 8 days before I got married.
What have you been playing lately? So you went back to Resident Evil 7. Well, we'll start there.
I did. The video you sent me was amazing.
I still don't think you'll finish that before next week. You got a week. It's a short game,
I got 12 days.
It's a short game.
I just got to man up. I can't be scared anymore. Newsflash, I was scared and ran out of time and didn't finish it. So
if you got halfway through it though,
I did.
You got past the spooky parts, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely
I think most of the spooky parts are up front. Once you get out of the house and go to Lucas's fun factory,
which is where I stopped essentially. I had killed Marguerite in the greenhouse, and that is where I stopped playing. So that's all I remembered. So coming into the game this time, I remember the first half of the game fairly well. Like, you go here, you do this, or broad strokes. I was like, you fight in the garage, you take the car, very broad strokes. It's been almost 5 years, almost roughly to the day window of time. So, but back then I played mostly in VR, and this time I played in no VR. I would have played in VR, honestly, but it's put away because my office is now a nursery, so I wasn't really able to. So I just played all on the PS5, and I did kind of most of the game at 120 hertz HDR.
Okay.
And then some of the game, the beginning and the end of the game, was 60 in ray tracing. So actually, the beginning of the game beginning and end is what I recorded for the video version of the show. And then the middle, I played at 120 hertz. And I think we'll talk about that as well. So I definitely dabbled in this game. This was the first Resident Evil game I ever played. Very first one.
Okay.
So this was my initial exposure to the series. I was aware of Resident Evil, but this is the VR part and the demos, like this is what got me to look at and play Resident Evil.
This was really the killer app for the first 6 months of PSVR, I feel like.
Absolutely.
And even over the long haul, I feel like this was still the killer app. Because when this... I can't remember other games that came out that were big AAA games that had... Or you can play it in VR. Like, no other games I can think of off the top of my head. VR,
sure, yeah. I don't...
Like, I can't think of anything else that had
Hitman
options
3?
like this. Later. That came much later, though.
It did.
It
did. But Hitman 3 is a notable title that is playable in VR or normal. So
yes.
That's definitely one of them.
That came later after the launch of the base game, though, correct? Or was that at the same time?
It launched with Hitman 3.
Okay.
So when Hitman 3 came out, it launched with it. It is also still only playable in VR on PSVR. So whatever exclusivity deal they wrote, that's still there, even with the the PC VR market. I would love to see them bring it over to PSVR 2. They clearly have the technical capability to do so with Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake. Village is fully playable in VR, and the remake has at least a VR component or element to it, if not entirely playable, haven't confirmed. And their engine is flexible enough, so they clearly can, and I hope they do.
Yeah.
They just have to redo the controls.
RE4 Remake is Armature, though, correct? And I think Capcom did.
I don't think the PS5 remake, no. The Quest.
No. RE4 VR.
On Quest
I'm sorry.
is Armature,
yes. I'm sorry.
I was talking...
That's what I was... you're talking about the upcoming remake.
The upcoming remake
in
in March, yes.
Yes.
Because they've said there's PSVR 2 something.
I said RE4 Remake. I meant to say RE4 VR. I misspoke.
There's a lot of versions. We'll get to Resident Evil 4 before too long.
Yes, we will. Before we get too much into the weeds of the game itself, I did want to go back to something that you brought up here, which is kind of an ancillary part of this experience, and it's something that won't matter in the grand scheme of things, but we're talking about this now, and this is the first time we've played it. What did you think about the next-gen PS5 version of this game? Because I have to say, I did not think it was great. I really didn't. And I don't know if you feel the same way. Like, I felt like this game was one that was already pretty good looking when I played it on PS4 all those years ago. Like, obviously, this game engine has gone on to be the game engine for every major Capcom game that has come out for the past couple of years. So the game engine's great, and the game always looked good. But when I booted this up on PS5, I was like, wow, I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of technical bump this got and how much better it looks now. And that really didn't ever wow me in any capacity. I noticed a performance boost for sure because I ended up playing when I started first playing, I prioritized ray tracing, and I did not think that it drastically improved just the visual aspect of the game. So then I turned ray tracing off, and then the performance was better, and that was good. But I didn't feel like the ray tracing boost necessarily made the game look that much more impressive. Like, it was not on equal par with the PS5 version of Village, let's say. Like, Village still looks drastically better, in my opinion.
Sure.
And I was hoping that this would look more akin to Village with this PS5 version. I didn't know if the same could be said for you, though.
So, one thing we have to consider is this is the first RE engine game.
It is.
So it's older. What they've done in these new updates is either ray tracing, which is fair at a consistent 60, or 120 hertz, which is with no ray tracing. That's kind of the trade-off. Or no ray tracing and you still get the 60, stable 60. So I did watch Digital Foundry's video when it came out, and I'll link it in the show notes and stuff, but the ray tracing is subtle. You mostly see it in tight corridors and just the lighting. There's definitely a difference, especially I was flipping between them at some points. Your TV can't do 120 hertz, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
And if you're wondering how I wouldn't know that, I'm currently playing on a TV that is not mine. So
Sure.
There is that.
This, playing it at 120, I was surprised at, it's super smooth and slick, but I was surprised how used to it I was. And then I remembered duh, this game ran at 120 hertz on the PS4 in PSVR. So
yeah.
So the bump in frame rate wasn't this big surprise or revelation to me coming from like 30 to 120 because I was already used to it. The ray tracing I liked combined with the HDR because I never played this game with HDR before. I think just the contrast and colors there was pretty nice. But the stability was the overall big thing for me. And just the texture quality and stuff, everything's sharper, a little more detailed. It looks really great, especially playing on, before I was playing this on a 21-inch LCD 1080p TV, and now I'm playing on a 55-inch 4K OLED. Yeah. So just a big quality of life overall.
That's why I opted to turn off ray tracing personally. I felt like it was just the frame rate was kind of...
It's stable across the board.
Is it really?
Yeah.
It just didn't feel... I mean, maybe it was something in my monkey brain that was making me think it wasn't as stable when I had the ray tracing turned on. But it did not seem as consistent for me when I was playing it. And I turned it off pretty quickly early into the game because of that. But that could have just been something I was tripping myself out about.
From what I recall, because I watched the video before picking, so I knew which kind of mode to pick or which one I would prefer. And they both are super stable. So the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, that's a different story. But we'll save that for another time.
We'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed playing it, though. And again, the bulk of it was at 120. I enjoyed it. I also, PS5 specific, the adaptive triggers, I thought felt pretty good for some of the weapons. The shotgun, the grenade launcher, those types of things I thought felt pretty good with the triggers. So definitely look forward to that stuff.
It didn't stand out to me too much. Like, I think... Some devs have shown that they really look to take advantage of the DualSense in greater ways than, I think of Returnal. Returnal's still one of the best examples of using the DualSense by far. And I'm not expecting Capcom to, this is a larger talking point about the PS5 and how developers are using the DualSense. I'm not expecting Capcom to go back and add all these crazy DualSense features to this 5-year-old game. No, the DualSense and haptics, the triggers and the haptics and stuff like that, they're good for an older version of the game.
Yeah.
But nothing that blew my pants off or anything like that. But
it'll be cool to see what they do with Village and VR, take what they've done already and apply it to the future.
For sure. Let's talk about the game itself, though. And I do want to hone in on sort of the setting of this game first. I think this is going to be a through line. Honestly, with all these games, I feel like the setting is going to be the first major thing that we're going to look to talk about throughout this whole season. This game, like I said at the top, really goes back to basics, especially coming off of Resident Evil 6, which was the third-person shooter game in the series, if you're not counting spinoffs and such. The third shooter-focused Resident Evil game. It featured a lot of different characters, and the scope of that game was you were bouncing all around the world and fighting a ton of different zombies and bioweapons, and crazy. This game brought the scope back in, put it into a single manor / mansion / house, whatever you want to call it. It's on a single property, sort of, until the end when you're on a boat, but that's... For the most part, this game is very similar to the original Resident Evil, where you are in one house in its surrounding areas. And I love that, personally. I don't know how you feel about this game's location being set in the deep south down there in Louisiana, the bayous of Louisiana. I think it makes for a fantastic setting. I think it makes for one that has enough similarities to the original Resident Evil, where you're in this sprawling property, this large estate that's got all these old, strange parts of the property that are built out. I like when you go to the old house, which is where Marguerite's at, and there you can see on the wall that house itself was built in the 1800s. You are at this place that is very old, and there are a lot of weird aspects of all of these different locations you're bouncing around to. But it feels interconnected, it feels cohesive, and at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's clearly trying to call back to the original Resident Evil with its structure, but it's not so one-to-one that you feel like it's not like a Force Awakens to New Hope, where like you go see. I went to go see the Force Awakens. It's like, wow, they really just mirrored the original Star Wars movie here. You can tell what they're trying to do here in Resident Evil 7, which is kind of mirror the original game, but it's not so blatant that I felt like that when I was playing it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It still feels wholly unique and like it's its own game, but there are obviously things from the past that Capcom has drawn upon and brought into this one. What did you think?
For a horror game, it's spectacular, really. It is an immersive environment. I wrote down, the house is horrific. Boondocks hoarder filth. Like, it feels contagious. If I touch anything, I will get sick. Which is really kind of leans into the mold horror aspects of it. In the beginning, where you're first in the house and you open the pot and a cockroach is on your... Like, they do a lot of stuff to indicate how filthy it is. There's good environmental storytelling here. You know, these people are sick, not necessarily from a medical perspective of we're infected with a disease, but more they are initially portrayed as just psycho people. And then later you learn what has happened to them. And we'll talk about that. I actually have issues with that. So the environment itself, super spooky, greatly designed. I think the way the house peels, the original house, unravels itself is really cool. There's the kitchen area, and then you move into the main area.
Yeah.
And then you go to the basement. And basements are always scary places. And how things kind of connect and tie back later, how you end up in that workshop down in the basement at one point after getting some keys. It's all tied together really well. I think some of the areas feel a bit tacked on later. I think the old house, while super creepy and like flooded with water, having that connect to the greenhouse and like Marguerite be like a bug plant late. Like I didn't care necessarily for the tunnel that connected those two. Like that just felt kind of like mashed together. And then what part of the house is Lucas in? Like where he conducts that just felt like
it's the farm. So
he
repurposed their farm into his little fun house there.
I didn't really understand where that space took place.
Yeah.
And then later, obviously, you go to the boat in the mine. But the core house, I love. And the way, and the upstairs of the old house, which feels like it should have been in the main house. Like those two areas felt very similar. So
where you have to go find the arm, and Evelyn's back there and screwing with you.
The D-series arm.
Yes.
Which is a really great, just whole set piece up there.
It reminds me of the moment in Village with Puppet Doll House. Like that's their one section of the game where they're like, we're just going to throw in a section here to scare you. And that's all it is. There's a lot of scary moments in the game, but that's like an on-rails linear, let's screw with the player in their head sort of sequence, which is great.
And I have to say, given the fact that I played half of this game back in 2017 and then the other half today, going into areas I had no idea about, because I really didn't know what the back half of this game was at all. I hadn't heard anything or recall hearing anything about the boat or any of the other stuff. The unknown is very scary, and I think it's effective in this game. So playing this game fresh, knowing nothing, and then looking at the design of the house now, I think, this game is spooky. This is, compared to Resident Evil 1, which is interesting in its own right because that game's from the 90s, but this is a horror game first. It's horror, instead of survivor horror, it's horror survival. And they lean into this is certainly the scariest focused Resident Evil that I have played to date. And I like that a lot.
I mean, I've played this game before, and I knew what to expect, and I was still very spooked out in many instances when I played this game. Even when I did my speed run at the end, and I'm not really taking anything seriously. Jack's still chasing me around the house, and I'm like, oh, I don't like this. Stop. And it's just freaking me out for multiple reasons. He's more annoying in that, I guess, because I'll try to speed run, but I don't like that man chasing me around. I don't like Marguerite turning into a big old spider and screeching at me. Like it is very, there's a lot of creepy things in this game for sure. Even some stuff that is a little bit more, I don't want to say straightforward, but like even just some of the body horror stuff of the game. Like I think about later on in the flashback with Mia when she's with her partner that she's working with, trying to keep Evelyn under ties, and her partner's dying, and he just starts like barfing up black stuff everywhere. I'm like, this is really creepy. Like it's not scary in the same way that Jack chasing you around or not knowing what's around a certain corner is creepy, but just the body horror aspects of this game are also frightening. I think too, in that same vein, like I think of when Lucas puts the cop's severed head in the refrigerator and you can see that he was beginning to turn into a mold person. You've got like the half head, half like you can see the cop's head buried within the mold person's.
I actually didn't realize that was the cop's head.
Yeah.
I realized it later when you go to his body and have to get the key out of him, and he calls him a pig, and I'm like, oh, that wasn't just a mold head you put in the fridge. That was his head. Yeah,
that was the cop that Jack stabbed in the face with the shovel. So yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of creepy body horror stuff, and it all kind of plays into the same vein of what you were saying with that. Everything's dirty and grimy and just,
Ethan loses his hand.
This is actually a good instance to mention this. Did you lose your leg in this game as well?
No.
Okay, so this is something I figured out, and so we have not played Village yet for this season, so I'm going to mention something from Village, but there's a very popular sequence in Resident Evil Village where Ethan gets his hand just flat out chopped off,
puts it back on.
He puts it back on and he just pours some goop on it and it's fine. That exact same thing happens in this game with his foot. There is a sequence very early on after you escape the kitchen when you're trying to get into that hatch beneath the house to get away from Jack when you are first in the kitchen area.
By the kitchen, yeah.
Yeah. So Jack, if he catches you in that room, he will grab a hold of you and he will use the shovel he has in his hand and he will chop off Ethan's leg. And then he sets a one of the medical gel items down on the ground and he says, try using this and see what happens. And he's like laughing, and Ethan picks up his leg and puts it back on and he pours the goop on it and his leg sticks right back together. But most people miss it. I've played this game a lot of times, and it wasn't until I was doing some research for this podcast that I found out that was a thing. So I'm sure you're trying to look that up now.
I'm looking at screenshots of it. There's Jack putting medicine down on the floor.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So that exact same sort of sequence from Resident Evil Village that we were all enamored with, and I think it was more apparent because that's an on-rails sequence in Village. Yeah, this is an optional thing that a lot of people... You're never going to see this unless you get caught by Jack, and I think a lot of people don't get caught by Jack. But if you do, he chops your leg off, and then you just pour it right back on with the medical gel. So,
which clearly then indicates he's a mold man.
It indicates he's very silly. It's a very silly game, is what it indicates. While we're talking about locations, I do want to talk about the boat in particular and get your thoughts on this, because this is the one wholly separate area of the game for the most part. I mean, we've got the farm, which is, we can talk about Lucas's farm and that whole area too as well, because those are pretty different. I feel like we've talked about the old house and the main house, which is where Jack and Marguerite are at. Let's talk about the boat though first, and then we'll maybe talk about the farm and Lucas's area. What did you think about this part of the game? Because you had no idea this was coming. You're playing as Mia now. You're piecing together what has happened and learning more about Evelyn, but then you're on this scary boat where all this stuff went down. And then there's multiple spooky scenes in the past where you're seeing how the boat got this way, and then you're now on this area again. Like, I don't know. What did you think about this section in general?
I'm of two minds. Two parts of me. I like the spooky part of it, and I like playing as Mia. I think that's a cool way to tell her story and have her get her memory back or relearn what happened and get context for the true enemy of this game, the source of the mold, Evelyn. But I do not enjoy having everything stripped down and you just have to hide in the beginning. It switches to like Alien Isolation kind of like, I gotta hide in the closet until I find weapons later on. So I wasn't.
Were you hiding that much?
Yeah, because those mold things chase you around.
Oh, yeah.
You have no weapons, and
you don't.
And it feels pretty elongated, like you're going up and down and finding items. And if you were being thorough like me, it's like, well, I need to use this corrosive on all the things, so I'm going back to this floor and getting items, which is great. Carry that over. I was actually worried we were going to lose all of our items as Mia, like when we switched back to Ethan.
Yeah.
Thank goodness they give them to you. So that was at least somewhat fine. It's a bit like the flashback part's a bit long in the tooth.
It is.
So I'm of two minds. Like if it's a little bloated or a little boated, but it's a cool place. It's creepy, spooky. I really have more of an issue with the mine than I do the boat, because the mine just feels like, what? Wait, what? Why are we here?
Well,
how is this connected?
The mine's just reconnecting back to the house.
Yeah.
So you didn't play the add-on Not a Hero DLC, but that's where the entirety of that DLC takes place.
Okay.
Is in the mines. So that comes back into play a little bit more.
The mines just felt super filler. I get we had to get back to the house, but it just felt like I really don't want to be here, and all it really is a hallway for moldmen to come at me.
Yeah. Basically, it's a section of the game where they're throwing mold people at you and then giving you more backstory and lore info via text documents.
So finding. I'm more down on the mine than the boat, but the boat has some cool stuff going on.
I generally agree with pretty much everything you said. I really like the creepy elements of the boat. I like playing as Mia. I like learning more about, because by this point in the game, you still don't really know what's going on. Like, you have some ideas, and Mia keeps saying, I'm sorry, and she's hinting at things that Ethan doesn't know yet. And so the boat being the part of the game where those answers come about is, I like the story beats of it, and I like the creepiness and the atmospheric nature of it. But I don't like how it is disjointed from the rest of the game. Because the one thing I do like about this game is I think it is very everything is pretty cohesive at the Baker estate, and then all of a sudden you're just on a boat, and it's totally shifts.
I thought the game was ending.
Yeah, it seems like the game's ending, and then all of a sudden you're on a big ship.
It didn't feel like that fight with Jack was the final boss, but it also felt like the game was ending.
It's more of a final boss than the final boss.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. But it felt like we were done. Like I left Zoe on the dock. We were driving off into the swamp. And then it's like, surprise.
Yeah. And you do see some mentions in some of the text documents lying around the Baker house of there being a ship. And that's where Evelyn comes from. And like, if you do a replay of the game, you can pick up on those things in some of the docs that you find earlier. But I don't know how much you have to say about Lucas's section of the game. It's probably the weakest. I don't know. I mean, of the core Baker family, it's by far the weakest. But it's not bad.
It doesn't end in a boss. It ends in a boss fight, just not the boss fight you think. And I think a part of it is you solve the room before you get to the room.
That's the point, though.
I understand.
Did you do the whole thing again, or did you run directly to the lock and punch in the loser code and then go get the
no, ran and punched the code because I knew it all worked. So, yeah, if you play the VHS tape, when you get there, it's not changed. It's not different. The only thing different is the board on the back of the wall where you have to throw the bomb back through.
Yeah.
So all of the tension is sucked out of his entire encounter. Wandering through the barn is super linear, and you're fairly well stocked at that point. I guess the only thing you really haven't faced before is like the big fat mold monster. But that's super easy at that point if you have the right items, your flamethrower, your grenade launcher, like you're good. It's not a tough fight really. And then you do the VHS tape, which has zero tension because you know the tape ends in your death, like, but there's no immediate pressure. And then when you get back there, nothing's changed, so you just punch in the code. Yeah.
And again, it's a hanging thread they have until the DLC I mentioned before.
So I kind of wish it was either more puzzle-centric, as in more puzzle rooms, just kind of all connected, or it was one bigger puzzle, or you only knew part of the puzzle. Like, I just feel like they show their hand early in a safe way, and Lucas's entire thing has no stress.
I feel like that's part of why they do that, though. Like, if you play through the tape, you're supposed to then have one up on him, and and you can take advantage of that. Like, that's kind of the point at the same time, is that, oh, Ethan's already seen this, and he knows how to get past this, and he doesn't have to go through the same things that happened to the person before him. But I get your point. It does make it redundant, and then you're just kind of going through the motions. I think the thing about Lucas is he's one of the more interesting characters in this game as far as the events of the plot and what's actually going on. And his whole sequence doesn't do much to bring to light his involvement with everything that has been happening at the Baker estate and everything that's been going on with Evelyn. His role in all of this is pretty interesting and has some effects on the larger... He has more wide-ranging effects on the larger Resident Evil universe outside of just what's happening at the farm with the people in question, with Ethan and Mia and Zoe and everybody else. But they don't really hone in on those things until the DLC and until you've learned about this stuff that I'm referring to. And again, a lot of the supporting files that you'll find scattered throughout the game. And you're like, okay, wait, there's some interesting stuff going on here with Lucas. But yeah, after his whole section in the farm, he just kind of runs off, and that's the end of it. And you don't really see him again until you play the DLC with Chris. So that's a bummer. That's, I don't know if they ended up coming back later with the DLC, and they're like, oh, cool, now we can maybe do more with that. Or I guess what I'm saying is, I hope when this game was made, Capcom wasn't intentionally trying to keep those elements with Lucas hanging because they're like, we'll just release DLC later and do that. And the DLC was free, so it's not like people had to buy it, so that's good. It's not like they're jipping people out of money necessarily, but I would have liked to have seen more of his eventual plot arcs come to fruition within this actual game rather than supporting content later on.
Yeah.
We've been talking about a lot of the characters. Let's touch on some of them as well. I think this game has some of the most... I'll say I think it has one of the most iconic characters in all of Resident Evil, which is Jack. Mm-hmm. Jack is great. Jack is amazing. Jack's one of the best villains in all of Resident Evil, in my opinion. I think he is fantastic. His voice actor is fantastic. He sounds both... His personality of being both like... He's creepy, but he's like laughing the entire time he's chasing you. He's got this southern drawl. Come here, boy. Like he's so frightening. And he's unlike any other character that is really in this series until he inevitably turns into a large tentacle goop monster at the very end
with a bunch of eyeballs.
He's very unlike a lot of other villains we have seen in the Resident Evil franchise. He is just this hulking tank that will not stop and will not die, and he does not go away. Even when you saw him in half, he comes back as Tentacle Boy, like I said later on. I think this game in a lot of ways is made better by him. Marguerite, she's fine. She's not really in it too much, to be honest. Lucas, I kind of touched on him and my feelings on him, and then we'll talk about Ethan here in a second, but I didn't know if you had anything.
Jack is
great.
About
Jack.
Especially when he's chasing you in the house. Like, those are genuinely tense moments. I do think there's some game design issues there. But the actual character of Jack coming in the house, leading this family, being spooky and coming around, I enjoy all of it. It's really fun. Great, good tension. The fights with him, he's really crazy. Actually, Abby sat on the couch while I did the chainsaw fight, where he has like giant scissors or whatever. And that was freaking her out. That was a really fun, tense encounter with this crazy man character. Super fun. My beef with Jack is the end of the game, where in the flashback, they retroactively like, please save my family. I really would have just preferred they were crazy the whole time. Like, this sympathy card at the end felt really cheap and lame, and I didn't care for it. I like Crazy Jack and Crazy Marguerite. I didn't care for, we're possessed, please help us. I didn't like it at all. It actually made me a little upset.
Well, I would push back and say that's one of the larger through line threads of most of Resident Evil, is that most of the bad guys are just normal everyday people who have been taken over by, I mean, all the zombies, all the various members, all the core, like obviously Wesker is Wesker, and well, like, okay, obviously certain bioweapon people are like
okay.
Like
I Mr.
just
wish he was a
Mr. X and
bioweapon.
Tyrant and stuff, and Wesker. Like, these people are inherently evil, whatever. But a lot of the general baseline enemies in these games, your normal zombies, and they've been taken over because of this plague that has been spread by Umbrella, and Evelyn is a bioweapon, and she has had the ability to infect people with her gift, as they call it. Mm-hmm. And so they really have been taken over against their will, just like a lot of other people in this universe have. So in that sense, I don't think it's that out of bounds compared to what we've seen in the other games. But I get what you're saying. It just felt
super
at the same
unearned.
Time.
Maybe if there was more hints dropped about it or build up to it, it just felt super cheap.
Maybe they could have just more explained in accompanying files or something like that, like what really happened to them, and you could have felt sympathy for them in the same way that you feel sympathy for what's the character from RE1 remake, Lisa Trevor. Like, you have sympathy for her as a character, and they really contextualize that well through the files that you're reading and finding, and you start to realize that this is a tragic circumstance that has befallen her, and you feel bad for her. And I think they could have done the same thing here with the Baker family, rather than putting a very to the point, I'm not that bad, it's just I've been taken over, and so is my wife and child. Yeah. Like, that's a little family. That's a little on the nose to put that scene in there. I do agree with you. But I like I'm not as against the idea of them being taken over against their will by Evelyn, because it does make it tragic in the same way that Lisa Trevor's story was.
I think Evelyn is more like Lisa Trevor than the rest of them.
Evelyn's off a rocker, though.
Well, let me put it this way. The Evelyn that was a child, the actual child Evelyn, is a bit more tragic in the sense that she has just been in a lab her entire life and experimented with and on. Not so much old Evelyn, which...
Well, that is her. That is her.
No, I understand
she
that is
makes people
her.
see the child version of herself because she can make people hallucinate or whatever.
Right. I get all that. But I'm saying just the one in the flashback that is a girl on the boat.
Yeah.
That is the more Lisa Trevor, like, great reveal, by the way, of her being old and actually being the granny that was popping up around the house. When it clicks, for me it clicked.
Did you think much about the granny throughout the game? Like, there's another family member here. Who is this? Like,
in the beginning of the game, yes. Because she's popping up everywhere and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a terrifying woman. When am I going to fight you? And then she leaves because you go other places. I'm like, you forget about her. Then you come back to the house and she's popping up again. But you're used to this. You almost are desensitized to her as a threat, which is super smart on their part. And then, for me, you read the note and it's like, Evelyn's becoming old now. And I'm like, well, she doesn't look old. Like, it didn't fully click. It was when I came back into the basement. It wasn't even like this flat. It was like oh my gosh, she is Evelyn. Great moment, great reveal. And it's just the right level of surprise twist. It's not some convoluted, I was secretly doing this the entire time. It's just, there's Evelyn. Like, she was here the whole time as Granny. I wonder what would happen if you, like, shot Granny. I mean, she wouldn't die, obviously. But the reticle would go away?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if it lets you.
But good reveal. Evelyn is a satisfactory villain. I think in the context of Resident Evil, she's, she's fun as a source of mold.
Making a child the villain too is something that we've. There's some other games that kind of.
I think the closest would be, from what I've played, the closest is obviously Lisa Trevor. She is a boss in some context. You don't have to fight her. You can, just kind of let her go. But it's the same concept, I think, expanded upon fully in a game. Because in the remake, they add her from the original. She wasn't in the original. This is a fully fleshed out idea as a child, as a villain, which is also another just horror trope. Feels almost mean, but it's like a horror thing. Trope. It's the only word that really applies. To have a kid be possessed and a villain and stuff. And they do well with it here on their first attempt as a full main villain.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Ethan. I don't know if you have any strong opinions on Ethan, or if there's even much you have to say at all. Because I think he just sort of is supposed to feel like he's supposed to feel like an everyman. He's supposed to feel like you are the person who's in this situation. People have hated on Ethan for a long time, I think, from this game. Like, the game was good, but Ethan sucks. And Village it does some things to change that and play around with that idea. Or play around with that response that fans had. But I've never disliked Ethan. He's not a silent protagonist because he's obviously talking and
he's great lines.
Integral to the story. He does have very good lines. I think he's pretty well written for a faceless protagonist. And I don't really have anything bad to say about him as the main character of this game. And I think it's important to recognize when this game came out, which is after Resident Evil 6, which featured pretty much all of the main, not all, but a lot of the main characters from the Resident Evil series were in 6. They're like, okay, we've been doing different games where 4's focused on Leon and 5's focused on Chris. What if we put one game and all of them were in it? Yeah, that's a great idea. And then that game sucked and no one liked it. What will we think about that game? Find out later in the season when we play it. But that game brought a lot of them together, and then it wasn't received well. And so Capcom's like, well, we got to go back to the drawing board, and we'll just create a new character. And he's just going to be sort of a blank slate. I guess what I'm saying is this could have gone way worse than it did with him being the central role. And I think for what they were going for, Ethan being the central protagonist actually works quite well in this game. And it works very well in looking at the larger franchise and this being a reboot of the series as well, which is still meant to touch back to the other games. All in all, Ethan's solid. He's not amazing, but he's not bad either. But he does well in his role as the main character.
Being a first-person game and a VR game, which naturally first-person, but being those, it feels important to have a blank slate, or as much of a blank slate as possible, because you are being put in the shoes. They're putting the gameplay on the stick, right? Or on the headset, in your controllers, in your hands. And so it has to be adaptable to whoever is playing the game. But Resident Evil, from what I have played, before this show and during the production of this show, the cast is vital to Resident Evil. They are characters that people love or enjoy a lot, from spooky elements and stuff. And I think the rest of the cast does a lot of lifting to help keep Ethan as moldable as possible. So I like Ethan. And I think what they do with him in Village is super fun. And, maybe there will be more Ethan someday, maybe. Who knows? I don't know. From based off the end of 8, who knows? But I like it. It's a good, clean slate for people to just slip right into. and it's effective. And I think that was probably really tough for them to balance in the design phase.
Yeah, I do too. I think that was probably a really difficult element of this game. The other thing that I think was really difficult was just making it first person in general, which was something you started to touch on. But that's the other major feature of this game, is that they do shift it to first person. And the way we're playing this for Chapter Select here is different, because we're starting obviously with an original game and then jump to a first person game. And the first person games are not common in the series. There are 2 of them to my knowledge. Or maybe, is there? I don't know. I'm not counting other spin-offs or anything like that. There's 2 mainly.
Resident Evil 4 VR is a first person game.
Yeah, okay. Whatever. It's a first person. There's only a couple of them.
Yes.
And this is what started it. So I think as a first person game, this game really succeeds as well. I think that's another. I think there's just a lot of this game on paper, I think, was a recipe for disaster. Like, oh, we're coming off of Resident Evil 6. It didn't do well. Let's go back to the first game and we'll do that again. And let's change the genre, because I don't think people like the shooters anymore. So we'll just completely shift the perspective to something new, and we'll put a new character in the main. Like, everything on paper with Resident Evil 7 could have blown up big time in Capcom's face. And a lot of the original demos for this, people were kind of, maybe not critiquing, but there was a lot of, you could tell that they were drawing a lot of inspiration from games like Outlast and other first-person horror games that were around that time that were releasing in the early PS4 era. So it was like, okay, is this going to feel like Resident Evil in first person? Like, are they still going to have that Resident Evil juice in this new game? Or is this just going to be Capcom trying to play the, like copy things like Outlast, or what is the Machine for Pigs game? What is that? That's the one I think of for some reason.
Eternal Darkness.
Yeah, Amnesia. The Dark Descent.
Amnesia, Dark Descent, and Machine for Pigs, yes.
Yes, those 2 games. Those are other...
Eternal Darkness is the GameCube game.
Yes.
Not first person.
Yeah, the Amnesia games were other big first-person horror games that were around that time that were doing really well. And so that was the concern coming into this, is that Capcom would just try to mimic things that were popular in the survival horror space at the time, and that they would lose Resident Evil in the midst of that. And that's totally not the case. This is a first-person game, but it is also inherently a Resident Evil game. The puzzles are still there. All these things we have written down, the puzzles are still there. The inventory system is still similar to the previous games. The way you are getting around this world, I found a scorpion key. I can now open scorpion doors. Like, all these main things that are synonymous with Resident Evil and have been for decades are still present in this game. And even though the perspective has shifted, it doesn't feel like the formula has been lost, which is great. I love that personally.
Being the first Resident Evil game I ever played, this is I'm almost approaching this backward. Like, yeah. This is Resident Evil to me. And I see, it's funny, this happened to me as well with Zelda. My first 3D Zelda game was Wind Waker. And then I go back and play Ocarina of Time. I'm like, look, they took the Wind Waker chest animation and put it in Ocarina. Oh. So playing Resident Evil 7 first, in the games I've gone back to, it's like, oh, this is where it comes from. Or this is how these systems come from. So
yeah,
to me, this will always be Resident Evil on some level. There are some first-person things, though, that I think they don't get right.
Do you not like the shadow puzzles?
Shadow puzzles are fine. There's like 2 of them. The puzzles in this game are a separate thing, but first-person, doors.
Uh-huh.
The door stuff in this game is janky. There are times where you're pushing on the door, and it's like, are you caught on the door frame or not? Like, they didn't get the doors quite right. At least playing with a controller and not VR. Doors, a little jank. Sometimes you don't know if the door is locked or not. The map isn't indicating it, so you don't know if you're just pushing it wrong. You definitely get stuck on things in this game that are not super great. So, not necessarily a fan of that. I think that's kind of my biggest first person. The rest of it's more just scenario and level design. But the door thing really kind of upset me at a lot of points.
Well, what do you have to say about those elements? You said scenario and level design?
I think they do too many singular paths or approaches, and then they box you in, and you can't get past, like, in the basement or something, a mold man will drop down from the ceiling, and there's mold men behind you, so you're boxed, and you don't have any ammo, and it's like, well, you could run past them, but they take up the whole hallway, and kind of like the doors, you can't really squeeze past them. You gotta like shoot them to stun them to run around. It feels more janky than in, say, Resident Evil 1, where you could shoot a zombie and then run around it. Like, running around a zombie in third person is easier than running past a mold man in first person. And I don't think because of challenge, I think because of some level design and just perspective and things. So I felt trapped more than I think I should have, and not from this is hard or a challenge, but more I'm stuck on the wall and I can't get past it. So I definitely died to that more than once, because you even text me one time, you don't have to waste your ammo, you can just run past them. It's like, I can't run past them if they take up the whole hallway and there's no room to squeeze.
There are times I did that. As somebody who played on Madhouse, I'll tell you right now, I had to do that more than once.
I believe it. And it just, to me, it felt crammed in an unfair way.
That doesn't mean it's not hard or difficult or...
Yeah.
It's just difficult, I think. You're presented with a hard choice. I guess to push back on what you're saying, if they made the hallways bigger or it was less cumbersome, then that's an easy game. And you're supposed to feel a little stressed when you're trying to get down a singular corridor and there's a villain in front of you and you don't have enough ammo. Like, that's the survival...
Or any ammo. But
yeah, that's the survival horror aspect of it.
There's no way out. You're put in unfair scenarios, I think, because it's not like you can turn around and go the long way around. I mean, you can in some scenarios, but there's also there's enemies on both sides. You're stuck in the hallway. You have no ammo, and it's not like you can't run past them. You physically cannot. And in other games you could try and run and avoid being grabbed, or sometimes enemies would still grab you. It felt unfair at times. Or Jack would be in the hallway, and like the only way to get from the save room to the main corridor is down the one hallway, and he's just camping down there at the end. It's like, what am I supposed to do here? Lure him out, and then he maybe goes and wanders somewhere else. There just felt some like one hallway scenarios.
That's why the good Lord gave you a block button that you press the L1.
Can we talk about
throw
that?
Up your arms. We can, because I'll tell you right now, I don't know if you have anything to say about it. It is vital in Madhouse. That became my best friend. Blocking became my best friend.
It never worked for me.
Like, you're never going to totally... I should say, when I played Madhouse, I had one of the defense books on me, which is a bonus item you get for beating the game once. And if you block, it does reduce your damage a little bit more when you block. So that was one boost I did have while playing Madhouse. That being said, everybody hits like a tank in Madhouse. But still, blocking became very integral in my playthrough that I did.
It has to be, I would think, on Vital. But I'm telling you, man, again, maybe I'm just terrible at blocking or whatever. But I'd hit the thing, and then I'd be like stabbed or thrown around or pushed back onto the ground. I'm like, what is this doing? Were you trying to time it as like a No, I just held it up.
Okay, yeah.
But I just felt like I was still getting my teeth kicked in, and not like my health's going down, like thrown around, like I couldn't do it.
Yeah, you still get messed up. You just don't take as much damage, I think, as a result. But they can still smack you around.
Didn't feel very effective. I was not a fan of it. Didn't really use it because I felt useless.
I think it just mainly diminishes the damage you receive, but they can still have an impact on your character model. I think we've touched on a lot of things here. We wrote down some other things. I didn't know if you had anything to say about the inventory system. It feels very similar to the other games. I like how you can inspect the items a little bit more closely in this game compared to some of the others.
To me, it's interesting. It feels like a half step between older Resident Evil games and Resident Evil 4. You're not really managing the rotation of the items. They auto-rotate. And really, the only thing is your quick equipped items or your shortcuts or whatever go vertical, and everything else is horizontal. So there's a little bit of space managing, but not a ton.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to think about it necessarily too much. It never got to the point I felt in Resident Evil 1 Remake where it was unfair. I put things away. There's plenty of boxes. So it felt good. It was a decent system. The crafting was slightly interesting. I never really did anything with the psychostimulant stuff. So that felt like an unnecessary part of crafting. But, then there's different ammos or levels of chem fluid. So it was good. Wasn't the best, but it was good for the type of game we were dealing with here.
I actually really like the weapons in this game because I think there's enough of them, but not so many that it's overload at the same time. Like there's about, off the top of my head, there's like 6 to 7 items I feel like in the game, like 2 shotguns, a grenade launcher, and then are you counting the Magnum as a pistol, I assume?
Yeah, the one in the cage. I didn't get it, but...
Oh, it's a beast. It's great.
That's what it says. And then there's 2 other pistols and the flamethrower. So 7, and then bombs and a machine gun by the end.
Yeah, you get a machine gun, I guess, towards the end.
That's typical.
And then you can get some other weapons in the secondary runs if you complete certain things. Like the gun you pick up at the end to kill Evelyn. If you beat the game, you can get that gun and run around the house and blast everybody with it, which I did. I had in my run. It's called the Albert. It's pretty great, but even that was not good enough to kill everybody in Madhouse. Madhouse was rough. I know a lot of people, just to talk a little bit about my Madhouse run real quick. We don't have to spend too much time on this because I know you didn't play in this mode. So Madhouse changes certain factors of the game. Like for instance, in your own playthrough, after you fight Jack in the garage, he doesn't show back up for you until you go in the bathroom and drain the bathtub, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he shows up right away for me the second I get back out in the main house. He's running around, ready to go. So
I don't like that. No, thank you, sir. You're a spooky man. Stay away.
But other thing, in conjunction with that, though, the scorpion key, rather than putting the scorpion key down in the basement on the body, do you remember when it on that location what I'm referring to?
I believe so, yes.
Because you have to go, because in the easy mode, what you have to do is you have to go up to the bathtub, get the, I think the big shadow door thing, open the shadow door, go back through that back way, and then you go through the back hallway, and then you can go into the basement. And then in the basement, there's the scorpion key, and then that lets you get back out in the main area. Anyway, in Madhouse, the scorpion key is in the middle of the room, and it's in one of the bird cages, so you have to put 3 antique coins in it in order to unlock it. But however, there are 30 antique coins in Madhouse rather than 18. There's like 33, I think. So there's more coins in Madhouse mode. But you have to use those coins to get the scorpion key. So basically what I did was I went out in the main hallway, opened the scorpion key right away. The second you open the cage, Jack busts into the room. You have to go open the scorpion key door, get out of there, and then you can go downstairs and try to do the chainsaw fight with him right away. And that's basically what I had to do because I couldn't run around any of the house because he was just going to be there ready to... Yes, he was a huge threat. So in my own playthrough, I went to the basement. I was like, all right, let's square up and fight now so we could get this done with. This is the first thing I did, is just tried to kill him to get him out of the way. So that's, I mean, there's like little differences like that throughout the game. And then obviously everybody hits way harder. Everybody takes way more hits. It's really, really difficult, but it's a really, very fun way to play the game. Also, saves are limited as well. So I had cassette tapes. You can only save it to cassette tape players if you have cassette tapes on hand, similar to the ink ribbons. So I still ended the game. I was saving pretty frequently, and I still had probably, I want to say like 5 cassettes by the end of the game. So you're stressed because you don't know when you're going to get more of them, so you don't want to save too much. And I felt like I was saving a little more than I needed to at times, and there was still always more for me to find. So I never actually hit 0 cassette tapes, and I was like, I don't know when I'll be able to save again. But yeah, it's a fun mode to play on. I definitely recommend it, and it gave me a lot of those OG Resident Evil vibes, especially with the saving methodology and stuff like that. It's fun.
I think if we weren't playing so many of these games, like we weren't playing them all back to back to back, I would have jumped into a Madhouse. This had a similar feeling to me as I did with Resident Evil 3, actually earlier this year when I played that on my own volition, and I just kept playing that game and got the platinum in it. And I think if I was playing this of my own volition here in 2022, by the end of the game, I felt like I want to do this. Like, I'll go for the platinum in this. 2 more playthroughs. I got this.
You could do 2 more.
Yeah. So that's an enticing hook. And there's always the thrill of the challenge. Would I have gotten through Madhouse? I don't know. I would have followed a guide, of course. But
yeah,
it's definitely an enticing game. There's that loop that you still want to go back.
I think you could have got through it. I would have coached you through what to do. I would have told you to go do your under 4 hour speed run, because if you do that, then you get a spinning saw of some sort, and that thing is a monster in Madhouse. You can basically one hit everything. It's kind of like having a handheld chainsaw.
It's like having a rocket launcher in RE3.
Yeah. You can basically, the boss fight with Jack in the basement, you don't even need to get the actual chainsaw. You can just take the one you've got to his head and it kills him right away. It's pretty great.
Pretty cool. That's pretty awesome.
So, but you need to beat the game in under 4 hours first. So if you did want to platinum it, go do your speed run. Don't heal. Play on easy mode. That's not that hard either. That's actually very simple. I beat my easy mode speed run without using any healing items.
Gotta be a good gamer.
A couple other things I want to touch on here, and then maybe we'll start looking to wrap up. I do want to talk a little bit more about the boss fights, and also let's talk about enemy variety, because let's talk about that at first, because I feel like there is none. It's mold boys and crawling mold boys, and then some fat mold boys, and that's all you got. Mm-hmm. And that's probably one of the weaker elements of the game, for sure.
Don't forget the worst enemy in the game. The bees, wasp, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Those are atrocious. You cannot kill them without taking out the hive. They just never stop hitting you. They block key paths, especially when she shows up. Marguerite does. Screw the bugs. Screw them. They're terrible.
I do not like the bugs. I don't like her being the bug lady. I don't like the bugs stabbing you, especially on my Madhouse run. That was not fun. That takes like half your health right there. Yeah, there's just not a lot there. You get tired of killing the mold people by the end of the game. Bosses, on the other hand, I think are pretty fun. Jack, I think, is obviously the garage fight's great. The fight against Mia early in the game when she's got the chainsaw is pretty intense too, because you still don't know really what's going on. You just got your hand chopped off. I know that's a little bit more of a smaller engagement, but there's a lot of high stakes in that moment. The game really comes out of the gates in a very strong manner, I believe, with that whole sequence where you're like, oh my gosh, I found my wife. Yay, we can get out of here. Oh no, I have to kill my wife with an axe now. Like, it really comes out of the gate in an awesome way. The first 20 to 30 minutes of the game they set the tone quite well. But all of Jack's fights are great, except maybe for the one where you got to shoot his eyeballs and he's a big tentacle dude. The Marguerite fight's fun, I think. I mentioned before, but the final F fight with Evelyn it's probably the worst one in the game. You just shoot her face with all the ammo you have left that you've stocked up on you, and
I looked up a guide. I looked up a guide for that fight to trigger that fight, because she's in the attic screaming, and I'm blocking because the game is prompting you to block, and I'm trying to walk, and it just keeps pushing me all the way back. Apparently, you have to run there. That did not occur to me. It was not. Anyway, and again, an example of blocking being bad, even when they tell you to do it. So, the Polygon guide the first result came off, the sections for that fight was shoot her face, periods. Great guide writing, by the way. I loved it. I was like, bravo, great guide writing.
Yeah, the final Evelyn fight, even on Madhouse, like I did not die to it. I died, like you said, when running towards her, because her little blast she does in child form can one hit you. But luckily there was a checkpoint right next to that, so that wasn't even a big deal for me. But yeah, it's just shoot her in the face a whole bunch, and then Chris will toss you a gun, and then you shoot her in the face some more, and that's all there is to it. The Marguerite fight, I think, is very fun because it is in that greenhouse, and she's running around, and you don't know where she's at, and she's popping out the windows, and she's popping out the ceiling. I like that she's spying on you, and you're trying to scan every aspect of the environment to try to figure out where she is at, and you keep hearing sounds. I don't know.
Sounds
I
like
think it's a
you
good fight.
moved throughout the house in that fight.
Sounds like I played it on Madhouse, and I had to, so yes.
I just sat in the corner.
Yeah.
And she just eventually would come, and I would shoot her. I didn't. I did die toward the very end. I wish there was a better indication for the status of bosses, their health or current condition. There are clear like phase triggers where they do some animation they haven't done before, and you're like, I know I'm in the next phase. But each boss doesn't have a clear indication of how far along you are. And so I wish there was something more with that, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. The blood on the screen is something that got really annoying to me with that as well, because I immediately went to the options and toggled it down to as little blood that can appear on the screen as possible is what I want to see.
I didn't even know you could
screen.
do that. Oh, I should have, because that was annoying.
It makes it that much harder to know when you are dying, I guess, but it's less annoying than having your screen shrouded in blood constantly. And again, because I was playing on Madhouse, there were some sequences where I was trying not to heal, and I was trying to see how long I could last before I had to heal. Mm-hmm. So I immediately went in there, and you can't toggle off the blood on the screen all the way, but you can dial it back just a little bit, I believe. Yeah, I don't know. All in all, I think most of the boss fights are good, and then there's not too many of them as well. I like that, again, as we said before, everything that's great on that front, I do believe centers around Jack. Whether it's the fight in the garage, fight in the basement with the dueling chainsaws, or even, I mean, he's not really a boss when he's running around the house, but he might as well be. You can't kill him. You can just kind of knock him down and put him out of commission for a couple minutes, and that's all you can do. Did you do that by chance? Did you ever try to fight him in the actual house?
No, just ran away.
Okay. So all the great boss fights, I believe, involve him. But I wanted to talk about music and sound design real quick, and then we'll get into some wrap-up stuff. Because very much like Resident Evil 1, like we talked about, I think this game's soundtrack is quite good, and I think the sound design is immaculate, and especially in VR. That's why I can't play this game in VR, is because it's one thing having it strapped to my face. It's another thing having all the sounds of this creepy manor. Like, it's so... The way they do the sound is so good, and you can hear Jack stomping around in the same way that you can hear Mr. X stomping around in the police station, Resident Evil 2. All the creaks, all the noises of the house settling, all the different... there's so much going on. The sound design in this game is truly, truly immaculate, and it's one of the things that I think is so good throughout the entire series, and I'm sure I will praise this with a lot of the different games, but I think of the ones that I have played and do remember playing, I think Resident Evil 7 might be one of the best of the bunch in this manner.
I played most of this game with headphones on because I was playing early in the morning, and I couldn't really have it on my speakers, so I really did get to kind of immerse myself in the 3D sound. That helps a lot, like with what you said with Jack, or where enemies are placement-wise. So that was actually a quite useful tool, but it is super spooky. The sound design is great. The horror design, I think. But the rest of the soundtrack, I really couldn't speak to it outside of the save room. I don't. And the
main
opening
menu music's great.
I honestly don't remember it. I remember the song that starts when you boot the game, because it comes in and just like, go talent. And I'm like, oh my gosh, get me out of this menu. So the save room reminds me a little bit of The Last of Us. It has like that weird out of tune twang kind of strum, like feels a little bit inspired by that, or No Country for Old Men, which inspired The Last of Us. So that was a little interesting. I couldn't tell you a single song from the rest of the game. So
I mean, the save room music is always what's at the forefront, and there's not a lot of other. Most of the game is that, like, the presence of music in this game is meant to be is meant to soothe you more often than not.
Yeah.
But there are still a lot of it is sound design based, to which I still, like I said, it's very good. I cannot imagine playing this game with headphones on like you did. That would have bothered me quite a bit. I just can't do that. That was when I originally played this game. I did play in VR for probably the first 2 or 3 hours, and I just couldn't do it after a bit. It was just too much. I didn't want to walk down any hallway because I heard noises and creaks and things crawling around and scurrying about. And no, thank you. It's worse. Your mind makes it worse, the things you can't see compared to those that you can. Like when a mold person actually does drop in front of you, you're like, okay, I'll shoot it. Like, it's not that scary facing off with an actual enemy once they show themselves. It's more horrifying not knowing what is around the next corner.
Yeah.
And these games have always done a great job of that. Let's talk about the legacy of this game and begin wrapping up here, because I think that there's a lot of things. This is something we always do throughout Chapter Select, is talk about the legacy of whatever game or movie or piece of media that we are talking about in that given episode. Legacy is a through line topic in the show. With this one, though, I feel like our discussion is going to be much different, and it's going to be because of some of the things we've touched on in the past, and maybe one thing we've not touched upon so abruptly is the Resident Evil engine, the RE engine that this game is built on. We mentioned it kind of offhand, or at least I did, but this engine has gone on to really be... I mean, Capcom has built everything around this engine in recent years. This went on to be the engine, obviously, in the sequel with Resident Evil Village, but it's the same engine in the Resident Evil 2 remake, the Resident Evil 3 remake. It's going to be the same engine in the RE4 remake. It's the engine... Is this the engine in Street Fighter 6 by chance?
It is. It's the engine for Street Fighter 6, Devil May Cry, Dragon's Dogma.
Yep.
It has become Capcom's main engine. And I think, like, this is actually a story I want to write for my blog. And it may be up by the time this episode's out, because this is months from now. But RE Engine is one of, if not the most flexible proprietary game engine out right now. It is across all major platforms, from the PS5 and Xbox Series X, PC, down to the Switch. It's coming to Apple Silicon, which is a big deal from a game perspective. So it's coming to Apple's proprietary chips there. So theoretically, it can then be applied to phones and iPads and stuff. It's a VR engine. It's got the frame rates, the ray tracing, action, horror, fighting, strategy. Like, it is so wildly flexible across their entire line. It's honestly, I think, a technical marvel. And it all started here with Resident Evil 7.
Yeah, this engine is more important than this game. And this game is important in its own way. And we can touch on that more in a second. But yeah, like, here's everything. I mean, we'll just run down the full gamut of everything that this engine has done since it first appeared in Resident Evil 7. It's gone on to do Resident Evil 2, Devil May Cry 5, Resident Evil 3, Monster Hunter Rise, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 4 remake. It's going to be in Exoprimal, that new dinosaur shooting game they've got coming out. It's going to be in Pragmata, which is an upcoming game we still don't know much about. Street Fighter 6, and then Dragon's Dogma.
You didn't mention
as well.
Ghost and Goblins Resurrection.
I did not mention Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection because I don't think most people even knew that game exists. But yeah, it was that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2D, VR, 3D, Switch, PC. crazy cool engine that just has
EA wishes Frostbite was like this, which is the engine they pushed on people for so long. Like Mass Effect, you have to use Frostbite. Battlefield, you got to use Frostbite. FIFA, you got using Frostbite. Anthem, yeah. They pushed their engine on everybody, and their devs were like, no, we do not want this. Everybody at Capcom is using this engine happily because it is clearly very good. And I think in a lot of ways, that is this game's legacy. And yes, there's a second element to it here, which we'll bring up here in a second. But this engine is more important than this game because this engine has led to a Capcom renaissance. And much of that renaissance has come about because of Resident Evil. Like, you can't undersell the success of the Resident Evil franchise since this game came out. But that engine, I mean, Devil May Cry 5 was a huge hit. Monster Hunter Rise on Switch was a huge hit. Exo Primal, I don't know about. And neither, same for Pragmata, but like Street Fighter 6 looks great based on everything we've seen so far. Dragon's Dogma 2, people are jazzed about that game. I mean, everything they've released with this engine has gone on to be a pretty major hit. The only thing that they have released within recent years that was not built on this engine would be Monster Hunter World, I believe. That was one of the only major games they've released within the past couple of years that wasn't built off the back of this engine.
And I would bet the next major Monster Hunter game is off this.
Yeah, but the next major Monster Hunter game could very well be RE engine. Because again, like they did it for the Switch version, the Switch iteration of that with Monster Hunter Rise, which is very similar to the PS4 and Xbox One game that was so popular a couple years ago. So that's one element of this game's legacy. The other element of the game's legacy is, we talked about it before, but not only did this game kind of save Capcom, but it really saved Resident Evil. Resident Evil had not been around for, how long? When did Resident Evil 6 come out? It came out in 2012. So Resident Evil had been dormant for 5 years by the time that this game came out. Now we can't even go 18 months without a new Resident Evil game, if that. Because since Resident Evil 7 release, that was 2017. Since then, 2019, Resident Evil 2. 2020, Resident Evil 3. 2021, Village. We're skipping a year here in 2022, which is when we're recording this. Resident Evil 4 Remake, though, is going to kick off early next year. And
there's the DLC for 8, which is this year. I know it's not
that is this year. Yeah. No, they have done things. They're adding new content to Village, new DLC, new game modes with the third person mode. RE7 is finally coming out. So like, we're getting new Resident Evil stuff every year. And
it's good Resident Evil stuff.
Yes.
Consistent quality.
Yes. This is not Assassin's Creed getting annualized type levels of derivativeness. At least not yet. Please
not
God,
yet.
Don't let it come to that. But yeah, it's all been high quality stuff. It really saved the series in a lot of ways. And I think that's owed to this game. If this game had come out, and like I said before, it was really a recipe for, I don't want to say it was a recipe for disaster exactly. There are some clear things that could have gone wrong with this game, though. On
a
paper.
lot of risks were being taken with the design, the approach, the reveals of this game. Like, it wasn't initially revealed as Resident Evil 7. There was, teases and different things like that. But clearly they tried a lot of new things at once, where I think other developers with such storied franchises would not necessarily do so much new at once. This was make or break to a certain degree, and it made.
Yeah, it broke in their favor, and it really saved the series. And I think Resident Evil would have always been relevant because those original games are still so popular. So even if this didn't turn out well, and let's say they feasibly still go on to do the same thing, which is Remake 2 and Remake 3, then I think those games would have been, fans would have still latched onto those games because Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 and those original first 3 or 4 Resident Evil games still have so much love behind them from the fans. But this game really showed that the series could evolve and become something new moving forward. And even as we're recording this, like, obviously Village has been out, and we'll do an episode about Village later in the season. But we're going to get a 9th mainline Resident Evil game at some point, and like a couple years ago, it didn't even seem like 7 was feasible because that's just how bad 6 was and how much 6 flopped. And now it just seems like we're going to keep getting new mainline Resident Evil games for the very, like, I don't know. Like they would have to put out a couple flops in a row for them to really start rethinking their plans for this franchise. Like this is very much going to be a consistent thing that Capcom puts out every 2 or 3 years is a new one of these games. And a lot of that is owed to this game.
Absolutely.
This really might be, I don't want to say the most important, but it's probably one of the top 5 most important games Capcom's ever released, just because of what it has done for that company.
Mm-hmm. It has introduced a technological renaissance in the company and revived one of, if not their most important IP.
Yeah. I really think you cannot undersell this game's importance, specifically to Capcom.
Yes.
And for fans like myself who grew up playing all of these games and liked them all and then was disappointed by 6. So,
And I think that wraps it up for Resident Evil 7. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to follow the show, you can do so right in your podcast player, wherever you listen. That would be super helpful. And you can also follow the show on Twitter at Chapter Select. You can follow Logan on Twitter at Moreman12 and his writing over at comicbook.com. You can follow myself on Twitter at MaxRoberts143 and my writing over at maxfrequency.net. And until next time, adios. Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. This episode was researched, produced, and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 5 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself. Season 5 is all about Resident Evil. For more on this season, go to chapterselect.com/season 5. Follow the show at Chapter Select and check out previous seasons at chapterselect.com.